Good morning. I would like to add my welcome to all the moms. Congratulations on you going through motherhood, raising. Some of you raise kids and grandkids, and it's not a job for the faint of heart. So, in fact, honestly, I think if birthing children and raising children were up to men, most families probably would have one child. So, you ladies are cut out for this, and we just want to honor you and thank you this morning. And the flowers were a very nice touch. Today, the message is actually the Biblical Church Part 4, not Part 5. That was my miscommunication to Aubrey Ann. And also the subtitle is Stewards of Influence. That's not in there, and I probably missed that as well. So, Part 4 of our series, Stewards of Influence. As we begin this morning, I would like for you to ask yourself the question, and you don't have to blurt out your answer, but ask yourself this question: how would I define leadership? How would I define leadership? The next question is, can leadership be distilled down into one word? Can we distill that down into one word? You know, leadership isn't something that gets preached on a lot, I don't think. I haven't preached on it a whole lot. But you probably all know that there's a plethora of books that have been written on leadership. Everybody's written a book on leadership. Well, not everybody, I haven't, but there's tons of books out there on leadership. So we're just going to scratch on the surface a little bit today and unearth some points that stood out to me on this subject, because I believe that if we're talking about the biblical church, addressing the subject of leadership is really important, and how leadership works in the church, and how it shouldn't work in the church, and so forth. So I'd like to address a few things that often get used to define leadership. Let's think about those for a moment. How about position? Position. People often say that person has a position of leadership. That may be true. Does position make one a leader? Not really, no. Positions of responsibility innately involve leadership, but the position alone does not make one a leader. How about this? How about authority? Does authority make one a leader? Some positions give one the authority to command others. That just comes along with the position. But does authority make one a leader? What about this? What about control? Related to authority, control is do what I say because I'm in charge. And the emphasis here is on power, not leading. Is exercising control being a leader? It would not, right? What about this? What about a title? A title of leadership. You know, in the church setting, the title of pastor or elder comes with an expectation of leadership. True? How would you think there'd be a problem if somebody had the title of a position of leadership but did no leading? That did nothing. That'd be a problem, wouldn't it? Okay? So titles can denote positions of leadership, but the title alone does not make one a leader. One cannot say, because I have a title, I am the leader or one of the leaders. So position, authority, control, and title are related to each other, but are they leadership? Do these things make someone a leader? Some other common things that are connected with leadership, although maybe not always recognized as such, are things like this. Popularity, leadership as popularity. Some of you remember back to your high school days, there were popular kids and others tended to follow them. People are naturally drawn to folks with charisma, charm, personality, and such, but do these qualities always mean that that person has the ability to lead? They do not, right? What about this? Leadership is status. I remember back on my early years growing up in the church, I grew up in, there was an extended family that had been in that church for many, many, many years. So long, in fact, that some members of that family just kind of matriculated into positions of ownership. You know, every church has owners. Did you know that? Every church has owners. And sometimes that's healthy and sometimes it's not. Some of the folks in this family were physicians. Some had other influential responsibilities and so forth. And by virtue of their status and by virtue of the fact that they had been there for so long, they found themselves being placed into positions of leadership. But some of these people were good people, but they weren't leaders. And so the church tended to suffer when there were people in responsible positions, people in positions needing to make decisions who weren't leaders, and they were there because of their status. Another is personal success. This is related to status. It's usually connected to money. And you know, money brings power, doesn't it? It's not uncommon for someone to say, you know, I have given X number of dollars to your program, your whatever, so I have a voice in what's being, in the decisions that are made. But personal success does not make one a leader, does not entitle one the right even to be in a position of leadership. So what is leadership and how does it work in the biblical church? For those of you who attended the week of prayer here not too long ago, you remember perhaps our first night we got up to sing some songs, and one little girl, I believe it was Emma. Where is Emma, by the way? Back there. One little girl, she raised her hand just like that, and I thought she was going to say, "Can I pick a song?" That's not what she said. She said, "If you need help singing, we can come up and help you." We said, "Come on up." And so those of you who are here night by night, remember that we had 4 to 6 kids up here on these steps singing. But there's something that stood out to me as I was observing this. Now, most of you probably didn't see it because some of this happened before our meeting started and so forth. But there were a couple of kids in that group who did something interesting. They gave directions and their peers followed. Can you stand here, guys? Come up now. Even at this early age, the ability to lead was coming through. We've all encountered people who are born leaders, right? They just seem to bubble to the top. In fact, this room probably has a lot of people in it who would fit into that category, who have the natural ability to lead. Some studies suggest, though, that even with natural ability, good leadership skills are roughly 30% genetic and 70% learned through training and practice. So even those who may not possess strong native leadership abilities can become effective leaders. So let's go back to our kids here just for a moment. The ones who were leading, the couple that were leading, were using something to get willing cooperation from their peers. If they did not have this something, they would have had to resort to some other method of getting cooperation, some kind of force, raised voices, physically moving people into place, intimidation, whatever, to get the other kids to do what they wanted them to do. But they didn't need to resort to any of that because they naturally used that special something to get the others to cooperate. What was that something? That was part of it. Faith? Kindness? Well, here's what I think it boils down to. All of that's part of it. What's that? Trusting. Example. Relationship. Oh, who said that? Leadership is the ability to influence others. Now, that involves friendship, kindness, love, respect. All of those things are necessary ingredients in order to get the ability to influence. So I watched those kids, influence their peers. Nobody ordered anybody around. Nobody threatened anybody. If you don't do this or you don't do that, then I'm going to do this or that. They simply influenced. They simply made the suggestions. The others cooperated with them because they had that something, that ability to influence others. So leadership, friends, if we could boil this is what I believe the definition of leadership is, and people way smarter than me and who have done a lot more research in this agree. Actually, I agree with them. That leadership is influence, period. It's the ability to influence. If one cannot influence others, one cannot lead. And if one has the ability to influence, they may not have a broad education, they may not have the highest IQ or whatever, but if they have the ability to influence others, they will lead. And that's what I saw going on up here. So position, authority, titles, and so forth are not leadership, but wise and capable leaders will use these as tools to lead, to influence effectively. And since this is a series on the biblical church, let's consider how leadership is supposed to function in the church. Now, the Bible has tons of examples of leadership's role in the church. We're going to limit our study here today to 3 examples that we gather from the life of Paul. One of the things that Paul tells us is that leadership is a spiritual gift that God has placed in the church. Here's what he says in Romans. Then having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us, let us use them. If prophecy, let us prophesy in proportion to our faith, or ministry, let us use it in our ministering. He who teaches in teaching, he who exhorts in exhortation, he who gives with liberality, and he who leads, with diligence. Now, the Greek word here translated lead in many versions and rule in the King James Version, or ruleth in the King James Version, means to stand before or to preside. That's what the word means. So, the one who stands before or presides, let him or her do that with diligence. So this implies someone acting in an authoritative, administrative capacity. So leadership is something God has placed in the church. Now, in a broader sense, there is not one gift that is just leadership. Instead, what we find is that leadership is embedded in several of the spiritual gifts, as Paul outlines them in his letter to the Ephesians. And here's what he says, Ephesians chapter 4. He himself gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors, some teachers, for the equipping of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ. Now, he doesn't mention the word leadership there, but think about this for a moment. The core of all of these ministry gifts is leadership, because the sole purpose of those possessing these gifts is to influence people to action. Did you see that in there? What was the main purpose according to verse 12? It is for the equipping of the saints. Now, can you equip somebody who doesn't want to be equipped? You can't. Let's suppose that you don't play the guitar, do you, Euro? Okay. So let's suppose that everybody in this church is supposed to play the guitar. That's just how a functional church works. Euro does not play the guitar. So I need to teach him how to play the guitar. So what if Euro says, but I don't want to play the guitar? Can I teach him? But he does want to play guitar. Okay. So that's going to make it easier because he wants to play guitar. I don't have to talk him into it. But suppose he says, I don't want to play the guitar. Am I going to be able to teach Euro effectively how to play the guitar? Why not? What's that? I have to change his mindset first. Somehow, he has to be led to want to play the guitar. Somehow, if I'm going to teach him how to play the guitar, I've got to put some guitar salt in his oats so that he gets thirsty and he decides he wants to learn to do this thing that he is called to do. So people cannot be equipped who don't want to be equipped. People cannot be driven to be equipped. I can't threaten you. If you don't play the guitar, we're going to throw you out of this church, or you're a second-class whatever, right? I can't threaten him or drive him to do that. People cannot be guilted, coerced, or manipulated into being equipped. So being equipped requires desire, time, and motivation on the part of the one who is to be equipped. And if they aren't motivated, they aren't going to invest the effort. So the leaders, the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, pastors, teachers, are to lead, to influence the church members to participate in being equipped and then putting their gifts into action. I'd like to look at a few examples of how Paul practiced leadership. How many of you are highly likely to follow someone who demonstrates belief in you and confidence in you? Are you highly likely to follow that person? Given that they're trustworthy and all of that, okay? They're not airbags and full of baloney. If they're the real deal, and they demonstrate confidence in you, they express faith in you, you're likely to follow them. Are you likely to follow them if you feel that they demean you, put you down, criticize you? Is that going to hamper your desire to follow them at all? Okay? Yes, it is, right? So notice what Paul says to the Corinthian church, 2 Corinthians. For the love of Christ compels us, because we judge thus, that if one died for all, then all died. For he died for all, and those who should live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and rose again. So Paul is saying here, and we're going to look at this again a little further in the next passage, but Paul is saying here, you people are important. You're important because the love of God has been poured out on you, and that's what should compel you to follow him and to serve him and serve others, because look at what he's done for you. And so Paul uses this positive aspect of what God has done for them to motivate them to action. Why should you, Corinthians of old or Christians of today, live for a cause bigger than yourself? Because the love of God has been poured out on you. We have a responsibility to live to serve others who are redeemed just as we were. So Paul is leading the Corinthian church to step up to their calling. Another thing Paul does is he led by personal example. In fact, he flat out says this in 1 Corinthians 11. Imitate me just as I also imitate Christ. Now, for me, that's a scary invitation. I don't think any of you have ever heard me say to you privately or from the pulpit, follow me. That scares me to death, honestly. But on the other hand, what's the caveat here that Paul is laying out? Imitate me as I imitate and follow Christ. So we saw in Romans 12 that God has put the gift of leadership in the church. We know that God doesn't send angels down here to physically show up and lead the church. We know that God puts human beings in position of leadership, and that those human beings are to lead from this position. The other thing about leadership that is just, it's a no-brainer, but we should say it anyway. If a person's leading, should there be anyone following? What if somebody's trying to lead and no one is following? They're not doing a good job. They're not leading. If there's a leader who is leading and no one is following, then basically he or she is just out for a walk. Okay? So leaders will have followers. And the followers will be following the leader. And if the leader is doing what Paul was doing, then the leader is safe to follow. Would that be true? But again, we look over the leader to the one the leader is following, and we say, we know the man or the woman, or the men or the women that are in the position of leadership are not perfect. We know they're fallen. We know they're sinful, selfish, like the rest of us. They're going to make mistakes. So we are not going to worship them, and we are not going to follow them blindly, but we are going to follow their lead. So that's what Paul is saying here. You might already be thinking of the history of Israel. They always followed their leader, generally speaking. And when the leader was a godly leader, did Israel tend to head in a godly direction? What about when the leader went off the rails? What tended to happen to Israel? They tended to go off the rails. So the saying that as goes the leader, so goes the people is scary and true, right? It's scary and sobering stuff. So we should also notice that Paul isn't commanding, intimidating, or manipulating people to follow him. He is inviting them to follow. When he says, imitate me, that's not a command. It's not a demand. It's an invitation. I'm inviting you to imitate me as I imitate Christ. There's a huge difference. So those in authority who command obedience or cooperation are doing so really out of personal insecurity and ignorance as to what human beings respond to. They aren't leading. And leaders who won't take criticism, won't admit mistakes, or allow themselves to be questioned are also being governed by insecurity or fear of losing power over others. They aren't leading either. Most people really want to be led. They really want to be led, but few will cooperate with being driven or bullied. The next point here, our final one, Paul led again through encouragement and affection by recognizing the growth and commitment of members of the church. And here's what he says to the church in Thessalonica. And you became followers of us and of the Lord, having received the word with much affliction, with the joy of the Holy Spirit. So that you became examples to who? A few people? All of Macedonia and Achaia who believe. That's quite a statement of affirmation, isn't it? From you, the word of the Lord has sounded forth not only in Macedonia and Achaia, but also in every place. Your faith toward God has gone out so that we do not need to say anything. Again, most people will willingly follow a leader who believes in them. These are the easy parts of leadership, and there's a ton more things we could say, but we need to spend some time on the tougher part of leadership. Leadership at times involves doing hard things and making tough decisions. Circumstances sometimes put leaders into situations where carrying out principle, as the leadership understands it, may make people angry. Sometimes leadership in the church requires setting boundaries, administrating discipline. And this aspect of leadership is highly unfun, difficult, and something that none of us want to do. And oftentimes few people will. But when discipline in the church becomes necessary, how should it be done? And this sometimes is where we get into trouble. Because sometimes discipline is rash, hurried, retaliatory. Proper steps haven't been taken before discipline is carried out. In our denomination, we have clearly defined guidelines for formal discipline, which we try to follow. But let's think about the root word of discipline for a moment. What is the root word of discipline? That's right. It's disciple, right? The root word of discipline is disciple, not punishment. So punishment is sometimes used as a tool of discipline, but punishment alone is not discipline. So here's some characteristics of appropriate discipline. It is it is a process, not an event. You know what I mean by that? We're going to look at an example that Paul gives us in 1 Corinthians 5 here in a moment of something egregious that was going on in the Corinthian church. So the process is supposed to be, and Matthew 18 gives us some broader guidelines here, but the process is supposed to be that If an issue arises in the church that needs to be addressed, who's the first person that should be spoken to? The person who needs to be addressed, right? Should that come to the whole church before it goes to that person? No. Who's responsible for taking that to that person? First and foremost, wouldn't it be the one who knows about the issue? Okay. And that should be really before that person even goes to leadership and talks to them about the issue. But if that person feels like they need counsel from leadership or they need whatever, then what's the responsibility of leadership? Take them, and let's go take care of this. Oftentimes, it's been my experience, and I ended up having to be in church disciplinary situations way more than I would like. Well, any is too much, but my experience has been that there's a fairly lengthy process from the time that an issue arises to the time it gets to the disciplinary process. And when that is handled appropriately, well, let's go through some steps here, because this will spell it out for us. It should be loving and restorative. So the purpose of stepping through the process of discipline, and once the process starts, leadership is involved. The whole point here should be to be loving to that person and restorative to that individual. It should be about repentance. Because obviously there's something going on here that ought not to be. So how is that person called to repentance? Part of the reason for the disciplinary process is protecting the church. We're going to look at, again, Paul's analysis of this in a moment, and also protecting the honor of Christ as well. So discipline carried out in the church is never to begin with public embarrassment, gossip, or harsh exposure. So in our tribe, and we're just going to touch on this because we could go way deep into this, but this might be new to some of you. In our tribe, our denomination, if a situation ends up going to or into a formal disciplinary process, we have two ways of carrying out discipline in our church. That's it, just two. And how that process works, if something is made known and the process of addressing that one-on-one, two-on-one with the elders or the pastor, the church board, okay, and we get to a point where there's no change, there's no turn, there's no breaking through, and this is going to have to go further, then it comes to the church board. There is a meeting called of the church board. The person or the people who are involved in the action are invited to that meeting, and they are invited to say whatever they want to say to the board. The board then votes whether or not to schedule a duly called formal church business meeting. And if the board votes to do that, that date is set. There's spelled out communication processes that go through both for the board meeting and the church business meeting. And again, the person or people who are involved in this action are invited to that church business meeting. This is a meeting of the whole church, or those who choose to come. And this is the time and only time when the issues are made public to the church. Prior to this time, the issues are not to be made public to the church. Only this time, if we are meeting in a duly called church business meeting, are the issues made public to the church. And the reason they're made public to the church is because the way we do things, the church has to implement the discipline. That cannot be done by the pastor, the elders, the church board. It has to be by the church. And so at that point, all the issues that are pertinent to the situation are made public to the church, and the church then decides by formal vote whether or not to implement the recommended discipline. So church discipline is a thing, and it's biblical. And when it is followed as it's supposed to be, it protects the health of the church. Some of you may be wondering, we're talking about church members and so forth, and I can imagine that somebody here might be wondering, so, Pastor, who are you and the elders accountable to? And that's a really fair question if anybody is asking it. If not, I'll answer it anyway. I am accountable to the Board of Elders. The Board of Elders is accountable to me. And the elders and I are accountable to the church board, and the church board is accountable to the church body. So that doesn't mean, though, that if Tammy sees me engaged in something or doing something that is a problem, where should she go first? But I'm the pastor. So, I love that. Yes. Yes. That absolutely makes no difference at all. The fact that I'm the pastor makes no difference in what her responsibility is. Her responsibility is to come to me and say whatever she needs to say. And if we can solve it there, and I go, thank you for sharing that with me, and I fix it, we're all good, no harm, no foul. What, though, if that doesn't work? What if I blow you off and I say, take a hike? Now what are you going to do? Help her out. What are you going to do? Okay, so she's to bring somebody along, right? You take a witness with you. That's right. Now, since I am the pastor, I'm in leadership, it would probably make sense for you to bring somebody else in leadership, right? To bring an elder or two, okay? And if that doesn't work, we keep working our way through the process. Yes?
I just had a question. You said the recommended discipline. Is there some, like a policy that has the recommended, or has options for recommended discipline?
Yes.
Already in place?
Yes, that's an excellent question. So the church manual has, I think, 12 or 14 points that can be used and need to be referred to if somebody is going to be disciplined. So we don't just pull discipline out of the sky and just say, we don't like that you show up for church late, and so there's specific things. So we have two ways of disciplining. One is through censure. Censure does not involve membership, and it's limited in its time. It's anywhere from like 1 to 12 months would be the span of censure. Okay? And when somebody is put under censure, they lose all their church offices, they lose their voting rights, they lose their voice in the church during that time of censure. Keep in mind now that if this is done correctly, the reason for the censure has been laboriously worked through with this individual or this group of people, whoever it is. Laboriously worked through, talked through, labored through, prayed through, pled through. And we're at a point now where there's the ones that are the subject of potential discipline have basically said, we're going to, take a hike. We're going to do what we're going to do. Okay. So that's one. Church censure is one. If the circumstances seem to warrant it, the other is disfellowship. And we're going to see how Paul uses that here in just a moment. But the other is that somebody is actually disfellowshipped, and they're not just disfellowshipped from the local church, they are disfellowshipped from the entire denomination. So if a church drops your name from membership, you are no longer a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And again, that doesn't happen very often. That's rare that happens. But when it does, if it's done correctly, there has been, again, this laborious process of trying to reclaim, trying to bring about repentance, trying to come to understandings, and all of that has failed. So the church board meets and makes a recommendation. They hear the issues, they listen to the parties, and the church board makes a recommendation to the church in business session. Here's what we are recommending the steps be. The church in business session then can choose to adopt that, amend it, or not do anything with it at all. But the church has the final say in how that's going to go. Yes?
Don't you think maybe we forget about the power of prayer? When that person's having a problem,
Yes.
get down on their knees.
Pray about it. Yes.
We need to go to that other person.
Yep.
We need to pray with them before
Yep.
we talk to them.
Yes. Yes, that's a really good point, Gene, is that we need to not just race into these. We need to go into these praying our way into it with the right heart. And what's that right heart? What should we be willing to do on behalf of the person that is being addressed?
We should love them enough to want to care and listen to them and be willing
We should make changes in our own heart, and should we even be willing, like Moses said to Israel, hey, if you're going to blot somebody's name out, take mine out. Right? Now that's hard, and I'll be flat out honest with you. I'm not there often. Right? There's sometimes I have had to deal with some things that I'm not there.
That's where the prayer comes in.
Yes.
Change your heart.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
we can work because God is working with both of us.
Right. Yes.
Children and you.
Yep. Yep. So this is tough, but it's part of church life. How many of you in your families just allowed your kids to do egregious stuff just because you didn't want to deal with the hassle of confronting them?
No.
You pay, right, when you do that. Does that affect the health of the family when parents who are the leaders refuse or back away from hard decisions because they know they're going to have to pay? Yes. So we don't do that. We try not to do that, right? Well, if you think about it in a sense, this is a family, and there are some parents who are placed in charge of this family by elected process, okay? You folks elect the people outside of the pastor, but you have a choice in that as well. But you elect the people who are going to be the parents, so to speak, in the family. And when there's misconduct in the family, do those parents have a responsibility to address it? And if they don't, what's likely to happen? We have division. We have, right? Is that easy? Have you guys sometimes as parents, have you had to realize sometimes that, my first job here is to be the parent, my second job is to be the friend? And I'd love to be their friend, but that just may not work out right now. Especially if they're between the ages of like 14 and 20, which is, as I said before, is not an age, it's a disease. But eventually they get well, right? They heal and their brains come back and they start thinking again. But there's this time, sometimes there's this span in here where this kid's just not going to be your friend. And you have to keep them from killing themselves. And they may hate you the whole time you're doing it, but you have to keep them from killing themselves. Leadership is somewhat the same way in the church. We have 90-some kids or whatever in the church. And most of the time, the kids are very well behaved. But occasionally, they're not. And what are the parents going to do? And are the parents going to be willing to parent? Are the leaders going to be willing to lead, even though doing so sometimes may put them at odds with people in the family? Well, anyway, I got way off on that. Thanks for the questions. Let me try to quickly work our way through a few things that I think are important to chat about here and get us to a conclusion as soon as I can. One of the clearest teachings that Paul gives us about church discipline is in 1 Corinthians 5. In this chapter, Paul comes down actually pretty hard on the Corinthian church for not dealing with a man who was sleeping with his father's wife. Now, it might have been his stepmom. It doesn't say. He just said that he was doing that with his father's wife. So, regardless, that's not good, is it? You get the idea that the church knew that this was going on, perhaps for a while. But when Paul writes to them, here's what he says, and this is from the English Standard Version. He says this, I think. Did I lose it? Just click me the next slide, Darlene. There we go. Paul says, and you are arrogant. He's writing this letter to the church. Ought you not rather to mourn? Let him who has done this be removed from among you. Now, whose responsibility might it be to undertake the unpleasant task of confronting this man and ultimately initiating the process of removing him from the church? Who's that going to be? The janitor? Who's it going to be? It's going to be the leadership, isn't it? The leadership, the ones who Paul calls bishops. And again, this behavior seems to have been going on for some time. And I want you to think about this now. If and when steps were taken to remove this man from the church, do you think there would be church members who would accuse the leadership of being judgmental and unchristian for treating him this way? I guarantee it. I guarantee it. On the other side of the coin, do you think it's possible that this man might work to gain a following who would support his self-justifying narrative and opposing the leaders? Highly likely. Okay? But when it's all said and done, what was Paul's counsel? The leaders were to lead and remove this man from church membership regardless of the uncomfortableness or consequences to themselves. In another vein, Paul gives this counsel in dealing with divisiveness in the church. He says this in Titus, "As for a person who stirs up division after warning him once or twice, then have nothing more to do with him, knowing that such a person is warped, sinful, and self-condemned." That's pretty strong, isn't it? So this division could be anything from pushing bad theology, from gossip, whatever it is that's going to create division in the church and tend to destroy it if it's left unchecked. And again, whose responsibility is it to address these unpleasant matters? It's the leadership. That's right. It's the people that you put into positions of leadership. So it's important for those in leadership to recognize what leadership is. Again, if we go back to the beginning, leadership is what? What's the word that defines leadership? Influence. It's not coercion. It's not bullying. It's not pushing. It's not forcing. It's influence. How do leaders influence the process to take place and influence possible change? So, we took some time to include this piece in our series because I believe that leadership is somewhat widely misunderstood, yet it's so vital to the health of the church. And it's misunderstood by a lot of leaders. And I want to close here by looking at several characteristics of toxic leadership, and then we're going to close this off by flipping that around to what healthy leadership looks like. So here's some characteristics of toxic leadership. The leader labels honest questions as rebellion. The leader doesn't create space for disagreement without some sort of punishment. The leader will not take personal responsibility for mistakes or when he or she has hurt, or when he or she has hurt someone, they blame someone else. The toxic leader cannot apologize with humility and change hurtful behavior. They don't place the welfare of their people above the image of themselves or the institution. They don't handle correction with openness and accountability. Toxic leaders don't empower their members because doing so would take away their control. They don't set or respect healthy boundaries. Insecure leaders cannot separate disagreement from disloyalty, so people are punished if they disagree. Toxic leaders do not respect confidentiality. They use information as leverage. Now let's flip these over. The healthy leader invites honest questions, and they are not considered rebellious. The healthy leader creates space for disagreement without some sort of punishment attached. The healthy leader will take personal responsibility for mistakes when he or she has hurt someone without blaming someone else. The healthy leader will apologize with humility and change hurtful behavior. And the healthy leader will place the welfare of their people above the image of themselves or the institution. The healthy leader can handle correction with openness and accountability. Healthy leaders empower their members because doing so gives them control. Healthy leaders set and respect healthy boundaries. Healthy leaders will separate disagreement from disloyalty, so people are not punished if they disagree. And healthy leaders respect confidentiality, and information is not used as leverage. So every leader is going to mess up on occasion and fall into one of these behaviors. That's not the problem, okay? Because we all make mistakes. The problem occurs when several items in this list are practiced by those in leadership habitually. When this is the way leadership is done, that's the problem. So as we close here this morning, for the church to function biblically, leadership and laity must work together harmoniously. There can't be a division. And the commitment of the leadership team here is that we will keep striving to get better at leading with humility and service and lifting you up as our flock to fulfill your calling. And you as members, you can lift us up with your prayers. You can lift us up by being honest with us. You can lift us up by giving us the benefit of the doubt if our actions are not understood, by asking questions so that transparent understanding can exist. God placed leadership in the church. God placed the laity in the church. So can we commit to working together in humility, love, and transparency to helping this congregation be everything that God dreams it to be? Amen. Worship team, come on up.